Good morning, Cypress Bible Church, and welcome to today's devotional. I'm Bob Machette, and I have the privilege of serving on the elder board. Today, I will cover the topic of relationships. We'll look at two areas: our relationship with God and our relationship with friends. Let's begin with the foundation, our relationship with God. God created us in His image with the unique capacity to live in relationship with Him and live in relationship with each other. Let's examine Romans chapter 5, the first couple verses. Paul sent this letter to the church in Rome. Although Paul had never been to the church, he wanted to introduce himself and make it clear that salvation is available to everyone that put their faith in what Jesus did. Let's take a look at it. Okay, Paul's saying we've been justified through faith. We have peace with God through Jesus Christ, whom we've gained access by faith. Let's take a look at what this means. He's saying we're justified. God's declaring us not guilty for our sin based on the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, not what we did or not what we earned. He also, not only does he declare us not guilty of our sin, he draws us closer to him. Paul then goes on to explain the journey that lies ahead for Christians and how we need to be different from the rest of society. Let's continue with the passage. Paul's saying, rejoice in suffering because suffering produces perseverance. Perseverance produces character. Character produces hope. Again, let's look at what Paul's referring to here. He's saying is we have that hope and we grow. We learn what God has in mind for our life and the promise of the future. He was preparing the first century church where suffering was the norm rather than the exception. He was looking at how people can overcome Satan's attacks and use that to help build and shape their character. So, how do we build off of this foundation? How do we develop this relationship with God? Well, by studying and learning God's Word. Make this part of our day to day process. It could be quiet time studying the Bible, it could be joining a small Bible study group, or something more formal such as Bible study fellowship. The key part is begin the process and make it part of your routine. While we have our relationship with God restored, we still live in a broken world. Thus, we need to develop true friendships to help us navigate these choppy waters and the suffering that Paul referred to. So we have support to build the perseverance, character, and hope that we need. These friendships will help us do that. Let's take a look at Ecclesiastes, which was written by Solomon. When Solomon became king of Israel, he asked God for wisdom and God gave it to him. Let's take a look at what he's saying here in chapter 4. Two are better than one. If one falls down, the other can pick him up. Pity the person that falls down that has no one to help him out. And how one can be overpowered, but two or more cannot. And that cord of three strands is not quickly broken. Let's take a closer look at this passage and see what it says about friendships. Two are better than one. Yes, two people can get more things done than one person. We also need to keep in mind when someone falls down, whether it's with a problem at work, at home, or with family, they need emotional support also. Same thing with protection against threats of the world. That could be physical threats as well as threats from the culture where we can fall into a trap that we may not see. Those relationships where we can both give and receive support is critical to navigate the culture. But the development of these relationships need to be with people that share a biblical worldview as we do, as the world will suppress the truth about God. Therefore, some of our friends may be giving us advice that is from the world and not from God. A true friendship is where you learn from each other, you gain insight, perspective, and you hold each other accountable to stay on track to develop into the person that God has in mind for you. We also need to have these friendships go beyond talking about hobbies, sports, and things of that nature. This needs to be an environment where we can be vulnerable and talk about those challenges of life, whether they're at home, at work, or whatever. From my experience, this comes more natural to females than it does for guys, because it takes us to an area where we're uncomfortable about being vulnerable. It takes us out of our comfort zone. So what actions can we take? I'd like to share a couple experiences from my spiritual growth. Like any other guy, I felt I could do this alone. I didn't have time for this, or who could I trust? Well, after a period of time, I found out the only perspective I had was my own, and that was not a good thing. So I took a leap of faith, and yes, the benefits were well worth it. I'd like to share a few things I did. I got involved in serving in various opportunities that came about. I got involved in some small group Bible studies. While serving gave me the opportunity to meet some godly men and establish those relationships that I talked about. So as I wrap up, I'd like to go back to Solomon. Keep in mind, Solomon was a guy that had it all: power, wealth, knowledge, wisdom, success. As Solomon was reflecting back on his life and looking at it, he came to the conclusion that everything he tried, accomplished, or tasted was useless, irrational, and a waste of time. Bottom line is, he felt that true satisfaction comes from knowing that what we are doing is part of God's purpose and plan for our life. As he says in Ecclesiastes 12:13, fear God and keep his commands. This requires us to have a relationship with God and a relationship with friends. So the question is, are you ready to take a risk and get out of your comfort zone?